We are coming back to the topic that we left off last week, and that was about the animals and plants. And today we are going to continue with what I wanted to speak about last week, about the dragons, about the mermaids, and even we will talk about the mystery of the Loch Ness monster. So there's gonna be a few interesting things that I would like to mention, and also a few of the different planetary events that I would like to speak about. The events that I would say have been forgotten in the human history for quite a long time, because many of us are coming back to the Atlantean timeline and how the fall of Atlantis kind of caused that reset of the human consciousness literally. But there's some events that took place before Atlantis, and they actually had even more of the impact. So I would like us to mention that and to look into those different aspects of how those events are kind of impacting us until today, and how those events shaped our relationship with the elemental kingdom. So it's kind of like, it feels like I will be talking about the elemental kingdom, but at the same time we will talk about history a little bit, about this very, very pre-ancient history that I would say has been forgotten and has been missing from many records. So I'm gonna get into that. I'm going to start with kind of making a small summary for those who haven't watched my show from last week, what that was about and what kind of most important things we found out the last time. So I felt like starting to kind of like finally talk about the plants and animals and how this relationship between us and the elemental kingdom is right now transforming, because that's actually happening to many people, where suddenly we kind of start to be able to tap into the consciousness of different trees and different plants, and they start to speak to us. And the same thing starts to happen also with the animals. So it's a very interesting process, and it seems like those different eternal frequencies and the source frequencies that are coming to this planet, they start to broadcast the original memory matrix coming from the Andromeda galaxy. And those frequency transmissions are allowing the trees, especially the trees, to awaken that memory that has been lost, and that has been lost during the fall of Gaia. So I'm gonna get more into detail on the fall of Gaia, and we are also going to speak about Maya, where we have Gaia, which is let's say the aspect of the planet Earth in density 3, but we also have a planet that is referred to as Maya, and we can say that Maya is like a twin flame antiparticle counterpart of Gaia. So there's like also a certain connection that we have with Maya, and now as Gaia is kind of starting the process of healing itself, same is happening with Maya. So I will mention those two planets and how actually there was this original plan that was supposed to bring back the encryption of these two beautiful planets, because we refer to the planet Earth as Gaia sometimes, but there's also Maya, and that's another aspect of it. And I don't think it's related to Mayans, by the way. I think that wouldn't be the correct association. I would say that the Mayan collective, that tribe from South America, it feels like they were more on the side of Thoth rather than the actual Maya and all of that drama that was taking place there. So I wouldn't say those are related. Anyway, we were talking about the plants and animals being the guardians of this planet, the guardians of this realm, and how some of us are holding the personal custodianship contracts, which is a contract of co-creation, basically, where we are giving those animals or plants the space in our gardens or our household where they can grow and expand and go through that evolutionary cycle through which they are starting to evolve into more and more advanced forms. While at the same time, they are also providing us the necessary frequencies that we need in our daily lives, as well as protecting the household from different kinds of energies that may not be harmonious. So if you feel that urge that you need to have a lot of animals in your house, perhaps you are feeling drawn to having such custodianship contract with them. And I would say that's something that many of us do, especially that there's been a lot of angelic humans on this planet that used to be in communication with the entire elemental kingdom, and also like the fairies, elves, trolls, dragons, all of those elemental forms, we used to be in open contact with them. What happened, why we don't see them right now, I will speak about it as we go on. So I gave the three main reasons why the elemental kingdom these days is not exactly in touch with us, at least we cannot exactly tap into it in a very conscious way, at least most of us. And the main reason was the fall of Gaia, during which the core of the Gaia suffered fragmentation, and all of those beautiful, huge trees that were able to be like even 10,000 meters high, they fell. And they were carrying memory. They were the keepers of the planetary memory matrix. So as they fell, we lost an access to those memories of like what was before Gaia, what's been happening during the Gaian split, what was the true purpose of kind of like starting the seeding on Gaia on the first place. So if you want to know more details about it, just check out my video from last week. But I am also going to elaborate on that today, because there's also like another aspect of it, and that is Maya. Another thing that has been very popular during the times of Atlantis were the dark magic rituals that were utilizing the reversed elemental force. And that totally distorted our co-creation with the elemental kingdom, because we kind of lost the memory of like how we should treat the other elemental forms. We should treat them in the loving way and respect their free will. We kind of started using them as tools for achieving personal power. So that's how those magicians on Atlantis actually started to get a lot of power through that totally non-Christic co-creation, or more like abuse of the elemental kingdom. And another thing that triggered this disbalance in the elemental kingdom was the dark flowering event and the distortion of the plasma templates of different forms of life. I also mentioned, maybe some of you remember that story of how the onion started screaming at me. Plants have feelings, animals have feelings. So I would say that when you're holding a tomato in your hand, or a carrot, or an onion, it has a soul. It feels just like you feel. So as we are becoming more and more aware of this reality, we are also progressively becoming more sensitive to the needs of other forms of life, and the fact that they also need to be heard, and their will needs to be respected. So this is something to remember about how exactly you can kind of like release that soul. I was speaking about that last week. Basically, it can be either done through the nomicide, saying a certain intention, affirmation, or through the use of the source window frequencies, the pure source frequencies that will allow the soul to transition wherever it wants to go next. What else did I talk about? And I also mentioned a little bit about the soul upgrades, how we've got, let's say, this ladder of like a pyramid of different types of animals and how they are going through those different cycles of kind of like starting from the from either like the insects or the amphibians, upgrading into the reptiles and anarchids, then the fish and the birds, and then it's like the highest stage of this evolution are the mammals. So then once that soul reaches the level of the mammal and kind of goes through those different cycles in different species of mammals, it can go through the metagalactic core and go through the upgrade of the soul into like a more advanced form. And this is happening much quicker now thanks to the fact that we've got the transmissions of the eternal host. So like those souls can actually, they don't need to go through the entire cycle, they can do it much quicker. So this is wonderful news for them. So I'm gonna start maybe with something which I would say is quite interesting. I kind of feel like this is what we need to start with. And that will be about the primordial spiders. Because as we are, I was speaking about that maybe like a couple of months ago on my shows that we had the primordial spider being born inside of the Nomi seed. And that primordial spider frequency was serving as a certain blueprint that the fallen Borgia spider collectives were able to follow. But at the same time, there's so much more when it comes to discovering the primordial spiders. It does feel like what happened on this planet is like we got a completely distorted image of those beings, where we kind of perceive spiders as intruders. At least I would say quite a lot of people have that trauma. And I must say I was also born with that trauma, and then later managed to discover that this is because I was quite abused in the astral realm by those different spider entities, kind of like wrapped in the spiderweb cocoons and different stories like that. So the primordial spiders kind of bring that frequency of the purity and wisdom. Because if we look at it this way, spiders create those eternal webs of creation. And that's why it's kind of like this, the eternal spiders, the primordial spiders, they came to place in a different time matrix. So like they are coming even not from this universe. And what is quite profound about those species is that they kind of like, they spread themselves through the entirety of this cosmoverse. And there's a deeper reason behind this that I will share in a moment. And those spiders, at first, all of them were Christic. There's many people that claim that when you have the zodiac signs, you've got 12 zodiac signs, but actually the 13th one should be the spider. I partially agree with that, even though I'm not a fan of astrology. I would say that this point is quite accurate, that you kind of have like the circle of the zodiac, and then in the center you've got the spider, which is like kind of unifying all of those other 12 signs of the zodiac. So the spiders are definitely profound, and the more you start kind of like even working with them or looking into them, you realize that they have always been here, and they were setting structure for this creation. So I'm gonna read what came to me about them, and probably I'm just gonna be kind of stopping in between as usual and just adding what comes to me as I speak. So let's start. The eternal Naomi spiders originate from another Cosmaya level, and their origins date back to over 980 billion years ago, long before the creation of our local universe. Eternal spiders are the direct expression of the primordial spider essence that has been directly present in the cosmoversal creation bubble ever since the beginning. So we had this primordial spider essence that was, like, let's say, in the one source field. And then once this creation bubble came to place, this primordial spider downstepped itself into the eternal Naomi spider collective. The main role of the eternal spiders is providing the eternal web of unity, a set of the etheric connections running through all space-time locations, connecting them together. That's why in the center of the zodiac, we should have the 13th sign, which is the spider that unifies all other zodiac signs. This primal structure was enabling the communication and connection between all the life forms, and the eternal spiders were the guardians of this complex. So those primordial spiders were actually, they were kind of first. They were almost first. Like there's been certain, let's say, primordial races that were setting the structure for the entire creation field. So they created this organic interface through those eternal webs, everything is interconnected with each other. There is no separation as long as those webs are active. The eternal web of unity served as the organic AI interface until the event known as the Elysian First Fall, during which the Black Dragon collectives separated from the source completely and fell. I'm gonna get to the Elysian First Fall in my upcoming videos of the path towards remembrance. We are gonna speak about why did they fall in the first place, because I know that many of you have quite a lot of questions about the Black Dragons. Anyway, the Elysian First Fall started destabilizing the eternal web and led to a group of spiders falling while trying to assist the Black Dragon races. So they kind of tried to go to the inside of that black hole gunfall matrix that was created by the Black Dragons. But once they were trying to assist and kind of rebuild that eternal web inside of that gunfall system, they were hijacked themselves. And that actually led to the DNA of the spider Naomi collective being hijacked and blended with the Black Dragon coding, leading to the creation of the fallen Borgia collective. So, destruction of the eternal web of unity led to the further distortions in the structure of the entire cosmoverse. The web has been replaced with the inorganic AI interface system. So instead of the eternal web of unity, we've got the artificial intelligence that, as I was talking months ago about it, it's like a multidimensional structure. So it's not really just like on the 3D level. It's very advanced, very developed, and there's many races that are sending all sorts of multidimensional attacks through that structure. The remembrance about the eternal web of unity has been lost for a long time until the return of the primordial spider essence, thanks to the opening of the passages between the eternal and external creation. Naomi, the primordial spider, along with its eternal spiders, begins the process of restoration and retrieval of the eternal web of unity. In order to bring us the remembrance of this structure, and to also heal the Vivi game, the victim-victimizer game, that has been happening between the human race and the fallen Borgia collective. Each one of us can co-create with the eternal spiders and utilize their powers for healing, protection, and grid restoration. So the primordial spiders usually look like kind of crystalline white rainbow spiders. They might be also representing different elements. So for example, you might see like a blue spider that is representing the water element. You can see a violet spider that would be representing the fire element. So there's many different types of spiders. And now it's also about healing that victim-victimizer game, as I said, because many of us are carrying those unpleasant associations with the spiders, while actually their main reason was to help, was to support with different processes, but the main reason behind it was to actually keep everything in this eternal web of connection, where there is no separation, where every single part of creation is connected to one another. So they've been responsible for setting that structure, and that structure has been lost for a very, very long time because of the manipulation of the black dragons. Basically, the primordial spiders were targeted at that time during the Elysian First Fall, because the black dragons knew that they could do all sorts of amazing things. They could create those eternal spider webs that could work as the rescue platforms. And then those rescue platforms would be able to rescue all the souls that would be stuck in their fallen systems. So the black dragons kind of started literally like a war with them, because they knew that the primordial spiders are one of the very few collectives that could stop them from expansion. And another reason for that is that when they managed to hijack their DNA and they created the fallen Borgia spiders, they became one of the worst fallen races. So that's why some of us have such negative associations with the spiders, because they've been doing terrible experiments on the humanity, stealing the DNA, blending our DNA with the spider DNA, locking us in all of those different spider web cocoons. So there's kind of like a collective trauma that is right now being healed through the presence of the primordial spider. And of course, there are still a lot of fallen spiders, like especially those ones that are connected to the AI. So we also need to always kind of use that discernment, whether this is like a crystal primordial spider or whether that's like a holographic projection. There could be all sorts of different situations like that. Okay, so I spoke about the spiders, and let's now get to the dragons. What are the dragon beings and what kind of role they used to have in the past? So dragons are primarily elemental creatures, elemental beings. The elemental force, which is basically the force of the 5 elements, the ether, air, water, earth, and fire. The elemental force expresses itself as various forms of life, such as elves, trolls, fairies, but the main guardians of the elementals are dragons. Thus, we can come across various types of them, such as the water or the fire dragons. So the ones that are the most popular in our culture are the fire dragons, but there is like each one of the dragons is corresponding to a different element. The highest form of this race collective is a crystalline rainbow dragon that carries the encryption of all elements put together. So when the primordial dragon was born a month ago, that would be like on the 6th of July, 6th of June. I can't believe we are already in July. This dragon kind of manifested as this crystalline rainbow dragon. So like the primordial dragon was born first. It carries the encryption of all of the elements. And then this dragon is downstepping itself into different expressions of different elements. So then we are going to have like the fire dragons, the water dragons, earth dragons, air dragons, ether dragons, etc., etc. So there are different collectives of them. Dragon beings have been severely abused through the use of the dark magic and the resulting reversals of the elemental kingdom. So there was actually this time on the planet, and I would say it was kind of like around the time of the fall of Atlantis, or a little bit before that, when there was like a really big hunt for the dragons. And it wasn't exactly about like killing them or getting rid of them, but it was about hijacking their power. What is quite significant about dragons is that they are the carriers of the virtues corresponding to the elements that they represent. For example, for the water it is purity, for fire it is wisdom. So the fire dragons carry the encryption of wisdom, mindfulness, and trust. While, for example, the air dragon might be carrying the frequency of freedom. So the dragons are literally the guardians of the virtues. That's why the dragons are associated with wisdom, because it's kind of like through their encryption and through us co-creating with their energies, we are actually learning that those are really big creatures, but they have also like a really big but gentle heart. And that aspect has been pretty much twisted when some of the dragons started falling. So the fall of certain dragon groups through those different dark magic ceremonies that were brought mainly from the Wisa matrix, it caused the reversals of the virtues, associating the dragon race with dominance, anger, or aggressiveness, primarily through the reversals of the fire element. So it's kind of like we've got those fire dragons stuck in our culture, but at the same time, they are the ones that got the most distorted. So that's why we've got like those dragons on the emblems and the coats of arms of different countries. They are just everywhere, this motif of those usually black or red dragons. And by the way, when I'm talking about the dragons here, I'm not talking about like the black dragon races. It's kind of like they are referred to as the dragons, but they are actually like, they are not really dragons, they are entities, quite dark entities. So anyway, I will just read that part until the end. Fall of certain dragon groups caused the reversals of the virtues, associating the dragon race with dominance, anger, and aggressiveness. After having reversed their encryption, dragons were used as weapons during multiple conflicts between various Atlantean bloodlines. The fall of Atlantis marked the end of an era of co-creation between dragons and human beings, as most of the dragon beings have been sent away to other dimensions. Some of us who used to work with dragons in the past may carry imprints of that event. So there's quite a lot of people that are like into like the dragon, I don't know, dragon types of co-creation. I even heard there's something like a dragon reiki where I personally don't support that. However, many of us carry something that I kind of refer to as the dragon coding. So for example, in your water plasma body, you might be carrying the dragon codes. So you would be able to co-create with the water dragons. And there's nothing wrong about that as long as it's a Christic co-creation. So we always need to make sure that if you are working with the dragons, you are co-creating together. And you are not abusing anybody's free will, obviously. So I would say that right now, as the primordial dragon has been brought back to this planet, we are actually getting back this wonderful connection that we used to have with the dragons. There were also like the dragon magicians or like the dragon masters that would actually be purely co-creating with those different dragon energies. So some of the human beings kind of like carry the encryption of that period of time, and there could be also some traumas behind it when literally those dragons started to be kind of acting against us, and we kind of needed to literally like harness them in a way so that they don't burn the entire planet down. So that's why there's been this operation around the fall of Atlantis to send all the dragons to another realm, let's say. Most of them went to inner earth or like to median earth, and some of them also emigrated to the astral plane. That was because we lost control over them, and it was kind of like at that point of like a serious danger. So that's basically the story when it comes to the dragons. And a similar imprint is actually reappearing when it comes to other elemental beings like elves and trolls and what kind of other beings do we have? Mermaids, fairies. All of them kind of like, we used to be in contact with them. That's why it's kind of like, it's not just a fairy tale that they could exist. They actually really do exist. But there's been certain events that made us lose the organic connection with them. So I'm gonna speak now a little bit about those different elemental forms and what exactly happened during each one of the different events, because I was speaking about the fall of Gaia, but we also have the event of the timeline wars and the fall of Brenawi, and also something that I'm referring to as the Great Split. And each one of those events is kind of like bringing us to a higher understanding what actually happened with those beings. So let's begin. So the fall of Brenawi, that took place 200,000 years ago, had a significant impact on humanity's relationship with the elementals, opening passages to the underworlds and fallen timelines enabled the contamination of the elemental kingdom, which resulted in the loss of the organic crystalline grids of consciousness that served as an organic memory matrix for the animals and plants. So there was a certain structure behind the fact that the plants can keep memories, and animals as well. Just like we have a certain crystalline memory matrix through which we keep memories of ourselves and our past incarnations, so the animals and the plants also have their own structure. And now this structure, because of those reversed energies that were being beamed from different timelines and also the underworld, which is kind of like dimension 1, like those twisted atomic energies basically, that caused a certain level of reversal, a certain level of metatronic reversal in those structures. These forms of life progressively became more compacted as their template's frequency holding capacity decreased. Many life forms lost the connection with their core identities, and same thing occurred to the human race itself. Both the human and the elemental kingdom fell into a state of dormancy. So what started to happen is that when we think about like the trees being much bigger and the animals being much bigger, and even like we were much bigger as humans, that wasn't the case after what happened during the fall of Brenawi. Basically, when we used to have that organic connection with the, and for now I'm talking only about the level of the external creation. I'm gonna speak about the timeline wars in a moment, and we are gonna realize that it's kind of like this blockage that happened before with the internal plasma templates. That was actually the main reason why we weren't able to fix those light body templates in the first place. Anyway, what happened is that we lost the connection to this D12 divine blueprint. We would follow this divine 12, and this was allowing us to pretty much almost be eternal. And same thing was with the plants and the animals. They would be able to live hundreds of years, and then probably like transition into a different form. After the fall of Brenawi, that wasn't the case. Our lifespan got much shorter, and then after the fall of Atlantis, it got even worse. So the fall of Brenawi was kind of like the beginning of the way we see our world nowadays, because before then the trees were much bigger, and there are still kind of like those imprints of those big trees, and kind of like well, there are also like different animals kind of like in stone, and then we kind of see all of those human and animal faces. That's something a bit different, but basically they used to live for a very, very long time. And now about the timeline wars. that started about 130 million years ago, and they actually continue until today. We are still kind of in that interplay with the timelines. And I would say that the timeline wars are slowly coming to an end as we are moving towards this new type of the host, which is called the transcendental host, because otherwise these wars would continue over, like, I would say, at least the next 500 years. That game is slowly coming to an end, but the reason why many of us fell into those incarnational cycles, this karmic wheel that I was speaking about a while ago, we lost that connection to who we used to be, even before, like, getting into those cycles of incarnations. And the timeline wars played a role in it because they were kind of putting us into a loop of traumas and kind of endless need to come back and fix something, fix some timeline. And it also led to creation of those review planes where our souls get kind of stuck and we are just repeating our lifetimes over and over. So it's kind of like putting the entire existence on this planet into a question, like, is this really happening, or are we in some kind of a simulation and just going through a repeat of some kind of a timeline? So I would say that's quite of an interesting scenario as well when we think about it this way. Anyway, getting to the timeline wars, which, as I said, started 130 million years ago, and they continue until today, at least to a certain degree. They affected the plasma template of the life forms that was allowing them to connect with their internal deity, authentic self essence. So the deity essence is basically the essence, the primal essence of your plasma body template before it degenerated. This connection was enabling all the life forms to reconnect with their internal blueprints, even if their crystalline grids of their light body structures got reversed. During the first seeding of the human race, there was a direct attempt to reactivate the plasma templates of forms in order to fix the split that occurred during the fall of the Gaian matrix. So, if you look at it this way, what the Black Dragons did was kind of like, I would say, very, very deliberate, because they actually started with reversing the internal structures, the plasma templates. And then they targeted the light body. So it would be quite easy to reverse all those light body distortions if we had a certain internal template to follow. But what happened is that Gaia fell, this plasma template started dark flowering, so we quickly had like this downstepping into Tara, and then Tara was following the fallen timeline since the beginning, so then we had Earth. And then we kind of already started evolving with a certain split, but that's why there's been a certain operation that took place, and I will mention that in a moment, what kind of project it was and why it didn't work out, so that we could first kind of restore that plasma template so that it doesn't start making, so that it doesn't give the potential of the distortion for the light body. Because if the plasma body is messed up, same thing starts to happen to your light body template. So, and we didn't know about the eternal at that time, because what happened during the fall of Gaia is that this knowledge about the eternal creation has been lost for such a long time. And so we were thinking in context of like, okay, plasma template, even though we didn't even have the full knowledge about that, and the light body, but there's been also this Urea body. So this time is very special because in 2022 we started getting this eternal host transmissions. And the eternal host is basically not about contracting yourself in any way, it's about getting those eternal frequencies running through your anatomy, and they are being provided by finally stabilizing the grids and buffering them to the point where we all could kind of open up our connection to the core essence of ourselves, which is our eternal self and our eternal Urea body. So the timeline wars that started to happen 130 million years ago kind of started destabilizing the original project. And the original project was. So this attempt of restoration of the plasma templates had been orchestrated shortly after the fall of Tara. Once the Earth's environment was stabilized, Earth was reconnected with the blueprint of Gaia before its fall, through the activation of the internal plasma template. At the same time, the same process initiated on the parallel Earth, through directly reconnecting this planetary body of the antiparticle counterpart with the parallel Gaia, known as Maya. So like you've got Earth, you've got parallel Earth, and then you've got Gaia, which is like the aspect of the planet in density 3. And then you've got Maya, which is like the antiparticle of Gaia. And at the same time, it's like the third density aspect of the parallel Earth. I hope that makes sense. Like you've got the interplay of those 4 planets. This allowed for the progressive return of all missing pieces of quantum that occurred during the Gaian fall through the mutual co-creation between Earth and its antiparticle version, along with their future past selves, Gaia and Maya. So the reason why I call them like the past future selves is because they are kind of like a bridge, like Earth is in the center, but technically we would say that like about, I think that was about 300 million years ago, where, sorry, that would be billion. I'm just getting confused with dates. Anyways, long time ago in the past, we used to be on Gaia, but then Gaia started falling. And if we look at it from the linear perspective, we had Gaia, then Tara, and then Earth. So technically that was in the past. But at the same time, Earth is meant to evolve to become Gaia, at least on a certain timeline. It's supposed to kind of bring back this imprint of Gaia into its core and then expand it through all of the timelines. But in order to get that blueprint back, at the same time, it's kind of connecting with its aspect, with its primordial blueprint of itself before the Gaian fall. So it's kind of like, it's about those anchoring points where you've got the past aspect before the fall and the future aspect, which is the aspect which is, let's say, ascended. So it's kind of the interplay of those different timelines where those planets are in their primordial form and they bring this primordial form also back to the planet so that Earth could finally become the fully embodied Gaia. But it's mostly about integrating all of the aspects of the planet, all of the fragments that were lost during the Gaian split. I hope that makes sense. So this plan has been successful. And let's not forget that also we had not just Gaia, but also Maya, which has been a very important aspect of this. So this plan has been successful for a long time until the outbreak of the Timeline Wars, during which the Black Dragon Legion opened portals and passages to the underworlds, Dimension 1 and Lower Dimension 2, and the Phantom Fall timelines, leading to the dark flowering of the parallel Earth's plasma template. So it didn't exactly start with our system, but it started with what was going on in the antiparticle side of the universe. Such manipulation had multiple implications. The parallel gates on particle Earth, the gates that were connecting Earth with its counterpart, had been closed, and Maya had been put into the buffer zone, literally moved in time, to avoid further reversals. So what came to me is that like what they did with Maya is like they actually moved Maya to the internal creation, because out of all of those 4 planets, actually Maya is the one that carried the most pure frequency. So they kind of moved it to the deity planes and put it into the buffer zone. And that was in order to avoid further reversals, because Gaia kind of started affecting Maya because of that split. And Maya also started to very, very slowly dark flower itself. So we wouldn't have we wouldn't have those blueprints and the situation would become even more complicated. So they basically decided to buffer Maya. Many stone formations, like the human faces or animals, like when we see like those, when we are like in the mountains and suddenly we see like human faces or like sometimes even animals, or we see kind of like those some of the mountains on the planet that have been literally like they have a structure where they were just like literally it looks like as if they were cut by a laser beam. This could be like the trunks of those huge trees that used to be on this planet. They are actually representing the life forms that would originate from the parallel Earth, but after closing the gates between the Earth and its antiparticle, they literally got frozen in time. So those animals that are kind of looking like huge stone formations or like the human faces, they are coming from the parallel aspect of our universe, and after the closing of the gates between those two realms, they literally got stuck in time. So that's very interesting, actually. All right, so we've got that aspect, and there's another one, and that is called the Great Split. And the Great Split happened about 10,500 years ago. So that was like about 1,000 years before the fall of Atlantis took place. So it's kind of like something was already in the air. Some groups already knew that the Atlantis might fall. And around that time of like 2500 BC, that's when the hijacking campaign of the elemental force as well as like the dark magic started developing very, very quickly, setting a potential for the structure that we are seeing on the world today, the structure of the global control, theoretically, of course. So the Great Split was related to the dark magic rituals and the abuse of the elemental kingdom that led to a conflict between the human race and the elemental forms such as fairies, elves, trolls, or dragons. These beings used to once live among us, serving as a bridge between the astral and the elemental plane. So it's kind of like they had their aspects in the astral plane, but they were also directly expressing themselves as the elemental force. We would co-create with them, and this would enable us to maintain a harmonious relationship with the entire planet. Progressive distortions that began to occur in the consciousness of certain Atlantean magicians affected the elemental forms, turning them from friends into foes, leading to conflicts between humans and twisted elemental beings. In order to prevent further reversals of the planetary environment, most of the elemental beings have been sent out to the higher astral realm, and buffered from the lower astral, where the fallen aspects of them would reside. There are still many places on the planet where the two realities blend, allowing some of us who keep their eyes wide open to see the presence of these forms. So if you kind of sense that like in your forest there's something magical happening, that's very possible. There could be certain sets of portals open or kind of opening periodically during different cycles. Usually in the spring there's a lot of portals open. And you could still sense the presence of those entities that kind of exist in two planes simultaneously. So what happened is that this is when this split between the astral, like between the higher and the lower astral took place, because those beings that already fell, and these were like mostly trolls and some of the elves, you cannot always trust them, they stayed in the lower astral, but those entities that remained Christic, they were taken to those higher subharmonics of the astral plane, which is dimension 4, And there was like this buffer field created between those two. And that's the situation that is kind of continuing until today. I would say that there will be the right time on this planet when we finally start to bring back all of those different forms of life so that we could again coexist all together. So last week I was also talking about the trees and I would be referring to some of the trees as the memory keepers and also like the tree sages. So I would like to elaborate on that a little bit, on how those trees are actually upgrading, developing their structure, and why they are so precious. So I'm just gonna go back and read what I was talking about last week so that you could get a little bit of more perspective on that. And then I'm gonna elaborate on specifically those tree sages. Some of the roles of specific types of trees, such as the oak tree or the pine tree or the maple tree, serve as keepers of memory. Through their massive roots, trees are almost like witnesses, experiencing different parts of the world, but also all the life field co-creating with one another. So as the trees progressively grow bigger and bigger, they hold more memory of various events that occurred on the surface, but also underground the planet. Even though this ability has been greatly decreased, mainly due to building artificial underground tunnels, preventing the roots of the trees to expand. What is very significant about trees is that they are the memory keepers, and they are a source of undistorted knowledge, the purest knowledge you can imagine. The information they carry is a result of being witnesses of various events, without any judgments and insertions. This allows for the pure access to organic knowledge held within the morphogenetic structure of the tree memory keepers. So you can access organic, true, undistorted knowledge through basically connecting with those trees that served as memory, that still serve as keepers of the memory. And many of the trees right now, through the transmissions of the eternal and the source frequencies, are getting back those core matrices. So I've been saying last week that those trees can upgrade from being just the memory keepers to a sage. A tree can become literally a sage, kind of like a very expanded being that holds the memory, not just like, let's say, on a planetary or like a local level, but kind of like on the cosmoversal level. So the trees that serve as memory keepers can be upgraded to the status of tree sages, keepers of the cosmic or the cosmoversal records. A tree that chooses such path is going through the 8 octant cycles of frequency accretion, through which it expands its awareness, grows in size, and its roots are reaching further and further to various parts of creation. So the 8 octant cycles means that each octant cycle is composed of the 8 years. I mean, not like 8 years, but like 8 cycles. So we've got like 64 cycles in total. So it's not 64 years, but like I would say that every single tree is evolving in its own, it has its own cycle, but it's basically following this blueprint of the 8 times 8, which is 64. The main purpose behind the existence of the tree sages is to restore all the memory and information about various events and experiences, and bringing them back to their core center for further review, as well as to maintain the eternal connection between different aspects of creation. When a tree fully upgrades itself to the role of the sage, it can choose to start birthing out the eternal keepers of the records, its own life forms that protect the tree sage and co-create with the rest of the life field in the creation domain. These life forms may have human form, but they can also, what did I write here? Right, okay. I'm just gonna start that sentence from the beginning. I was on a flow when I was writing that. These life forms may have human form, but they can also take on a form of animals or other plants. Tree sages used to be a natural aspect of the Earth's environment until the Plasma Wars, during which many aspects of the planetary records have been lost. Wiping out, because they literally just wiped out those trees, the tree sages. It's like they use those plasma technologies which literally turn those trees into ashes. That's why we don't have so much of the evidence that those big trees used to exist. Like they were either turned into stone, but that was mostly like for those trees kind of coexisting also in the antiparticle side of the universe. But most of them have just been turned into ashes, space dust. So wiping out the tree sages from the planet had significant impact on the entire life field and further fate of the human race. Without an access to some of the memories, most of the lessons have been lost and needed to be repeated once again, which equals the karmic wheel. Along with the fragmentation of the tree sages, the memory of plasma and timeline wars has been lost, clearing about 70% of the original records from the times before 2500 BC, which coincides with the progressive fall of Atlantis that started to take place. Without the tree sages that guarded the planetary records, most humans lost the access to their personal records. And at the same time, the planetary timeline had been infected with various insertions and overlays, originating from phantom realities as well as the blank slate technology. That's why most of the records are focused on Atlantean drama, while a significant amount of information about other ancient civilizations has been lost. The original memory matrix before the fall is held in M31 Andromeda Galaxy, and this link through the Eternal Host is enabling for progressive return of the tree sages to the planet, for restoration of the original memory pieces. So, as we are in that process of reconnecting on a planetary and galactic level with M31, this is again bringing back this memory, because if you notice, like there's so many people talking about Atlantis, some of them also will speak about Lemuria, and then it's like maybe a little bit about Tartaria or the Native Americans. But basically, it's like it all comes down to Atlantis and the history kind of being based on that concept that, okay, well, everything like the reset of the civilization kind of started during the Atlantean fall. While actually there's so many events like the Plasma Wars, the Timeline Wars, Fall of Brenawi, that have not really been spoken about much. They haven't been spoken much enough. And the Gaian Fall that's going even further. So it's kind of like even that alternative history has been programmed to a certain degree, because if you notice like the traditional 3D history that is speaking about it's gonna speak a little bit about Mesopotamia and then move to the Romans and the Greeks and then to the Middle Ages, and that's basically it. While there's so many other civilizations that existed that had a beautiful history, for instance, the tribes from the Himalayan mountains, how lovely guardians of the planet they were and how powerful complexes of pyramids they have built in this area of the Himalayan mountains, which is basically, actually it's a place where one of the flames of Reclamation is being anchored. So there's just so many memory pieces that we didn't know about for a very long time. Atlantis is like one of the many rabbit holes, and Atlantis is being used against us many times, where I would say that over 90% of the spiritual modalities such as Reiki or or different kind of like angelic cards, the tarot cards, all of them originate either from Egypt or from Atlantis. So it's like another aspect of the programming that we kind of need to break from. And this is becoming much easier because we can actually speak to the trees and they will tell us the whole truth. So it's like a beginning of a certain magical reconnection that is taking place. And I would say that history is bringing the awareness. It's making us aware of certain lessons so that we do not repeat them again. So I hope that makes sense. And of course, everything that I've been speaking about so far is purely theoretical. It's just another fairy tale. I hope that all of you realize that. Kind of shifting the topic, since I was speaking about all of those different events, I will mention a little bit about the dolphins, whales, sharks, and mermaids. What about this underwater life? What kind of functions dolphins and whales have, and what's the deal with the mermaids? Do mermaids actually exist, or are they just another fairy tale? Well, I don't think so. So, dolphins and whales are having a special guardian role on this planet, since they assist with balancing the planetary base pulse rhythm, the BPR, through emitting the sound waves. These sound waves literally speak to the water body of the human anatomy, regulating the BPR on the personal level and also on the planetary level. Dolphins and whales have been brought from the Lyra system to harmonize the body of the planet. Many angelic humans carry the coding of these races, which allows them to spread the same type of frequency when they tone or sing. So there's quite a lot of us who have abilities to sing and to find different tonations. And those tonations might actually speak to the water itself or to the water plasma body. And they kind of like those tones serve as the organic encryptions that bring the deep healing to the planetary grids. Dolphins and whales, so as I said, they come from the Lyra system. So it's like they didn't start on the planet, they didn't come through the natural way of evolution, they come from a different system. So, of course, there's been a certain race that made it a little bit complicated. They didn't take it easy on us, basically. In order to restore their natural functions, the role of the whales and the dolphins, some of the Anunnaki races brought in sharks that were supposed to trace certain angelic humans that would co-create with dolphins and emit the metatronic frequencies to the waters. So those different kind of traumas of like, people being scared of like sharks, and the fact that like the sharks are getting furious when they can sense the human blood, that's actually a programming that was inserted on purpose to create a VV game that was taking place. So in the past, the angelic human race that was like some of the angelic humans that were carrying this coding of those different dolphin and whale races, they were able to kind of like, let's say for a few days, go under the ocean. And that process has been stopped. It has been literally paralyzed because of the introduction of those intruder races. So I would say there should be less and less sharks in the environment progressively as we go on with the host, unless they actually decide to also like start healing their templates, because they are quite reversed. When it comes to the mermaids, they were born out of the combination of two templates, the angelic template and the Zionite, or the Zionite template, which are kind of like those humans, but they kind of also have like a little bit of that fish genome. So they are kind of like in between. They originated in Arcturus and Sirius, and later downstepped into the inner Earth, and finally the surface Earth, this Earth plane that we are at right now. They used to have open contact with the human beings that lived on the land until the fall of Atlantis and the interbreeding campaigns, during which many mermaids would get caught and become an object of experimentation. After that event, most mermaids left this plane and returned to the inner Earth or stayed very deep underwater. So there's been this terrible, as you see, what's been happening with each one of those different types of beings was that they have been terribly abused by the human race that was actually supposed to protect them. And with the mermaids, that was like a really terrible campaign because they would be literally like taken out of the water, cut into pieces. Their DNA was being used for experimentation. They were being hybridized with other races. So it's like a very, very sad story of how those mermaids have been abused. And if you're kind of like, if you feel this strange pain in your heart as I speak about this, it's possible that you could have like an aspect of yourself as a mermaid, like on a past timeline, and this is like an aspect that you might need to heal, because that's kind of triggering like this anxiety and literally like a small fear from humanity, literally. So after that event, most of them luckily left this planet so that they are not abused anymore. They mostly left to the inner Earth, and some of them decided to stay, but they had to hide, so they stayed very deep underwater. And that's where many of them actually started falling because of the lack of light, because they were pretty much like living in the darkness, and that's when their consciousness became a little bit twisted. There's also quite a lot of them like on the Arctic Circle, so that's where eventually you might come across a mermaid. The reason why they were kind of like kidnapping them on the first place was because they were possessing the crystalline gene. And that crystalline gene was actually giving them access to the underwater crystal temples. So in order to fulfill the plan of making the Atlantis fall, they needed to take the keys, to take the codes for those underwater crystal temples. And the mermaids were the guardians of those temples. So that's why they started hijacking them on the first place, in order to get that coding, that access coding for the temples. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do anything on the first place. So we spoke about mermaids, and now I'm going to explain a little bit about where the plants are coming from, like what is the structure behind the seeding process, how does that take place? Because actually, like I was talking about, like how different races were brought in from different stellar systems, or like different galaxies, or even different universes, and how they and how does this process look like from the technical perspective. So the seeding process of plants and animals is a complex procedure, since it involves imprinting the morphogenetic encryption of the life form in the planet's morphogenetic field at the core of the planetary body. This allows for the further evolution and expansion of the life form on the planet. Seeding of a life form occurs in the following stages. First of all, the divine D12 blueprint of form is brought in and seeded within the planetary core, as long as the planetary consciousness expresses its free will choice to welcome this life form and enable its evolution. Usually the planet agrees to welcome a large number of the life forms to bring various beings that could process a diversity of the crystic frequencies and anchor them in the planetary grids. So this is basically the first step, during which this morphogenetic imprint, with the permission of the planet, is brought in to the planetary core, usually to the core crystal. And this is kind of setting like the blueprint through which a consciousness can come to the planet and choose to directly embody through this divine blueprint that is stored in the core of the planetary body. Once the morphogenetic imprint, brought by the rays through a set of portals leading to the planetary core, anchors in the core of the planetary body, a stream of consciousness, referred to as the etaur, is brought in to allow the new consciousness to embody through the imprint held in the planetary core. The etheric blueprint of the form outsteps from the planetary core into the aquifer layer, which is still inside of the planet, where it begins to coexist with other life forms in the domain of the etheric world. So once we have this imprint, there is like a stream of consciousness that comes to the planet, and it embodies through that morphogenetic imprint. It's passing through this set of gates that leads to the planetary core. It's going through the process of embodiment, through creating the etheric imprint first, the etheric structure. And that structure directly expresses itself in the aquifer layer. The aquifer layer of the planet is located, it's kind of like a water layer that is surrounding the planetary core. So it's still inside of the planet. And then we've got like different layers of the Earth's crust. So it's embodying in that aquifer layer once it picks up that morphogenetic encryption. And finally, a being externalizes itself, passing through the aquifer gates onto the surface of the planet, taking on the physical form and beginning its evolutionary cycles. So then it's kind of this, let's say, etheric blueprint is outstepping on the surface of the planet, and then it could begin its natural evolutionary cycles. So I hope that makes sense. It's composed of those three basic steps. I've got two more aspects that I would like to speak about. We are going to speak about a certain event that is related to the moon, to the insertion of the moon on the planet, because that's actually also something that very much so affected the elemental kingdom in general. So as we kind of look into what kind of relationship the moon has with the elemental kingdom, I would say that it's pretty harmful. And this is something that needs to be healed. And I don't know, when I'm tapping into the future timelines of the planet, I don't really see the moon. So I would say that there will be a point when, I don't know how, but there will be a moment when finally we are not going to have that influence, because the moon was never supposed to be here on the first place. The moon, which is also called the Thea was basically inserted about 50,000 years ago. So I remember that I think actually that vision came up to me like shortly after the awakening of my third eye, or my eternal eyes. I would rather call it the eternal eyes. And I remember that it's kind of like I was asking, like, what's the deal with the moon? Why always those uncomfortable feelings when we are under the influence of the full moon? And I remember kind of seeing this moon literally kind of like like a celestial body, kind of like suddenly appearing on the sky. And it was looking red because it was kind of like charged with those very much so like reversed metatronic frequencies. And once they inserted it on the grid, there was like this very unpleasant noise in the ears, literally like this high pitch, but it was so loud that you thought that you would go crazy. And then suddenly it's like everything just changed. It shifted within seconds after the insertion of the moon. And suddenly it's like, well, I remember seeing like a group of people sitting by the fire, and like the wolves would be like walking around them, and they would be just playing with them. And suddenly the wolves started attacking the human beings, which never happened before. The plants started to, some of the plants started to carry toxins within themselves, so they started to become poison for us. So it's literally, it's as if the elemental kingdom turned their back against us because it started to be programmed by the moon. And that's very much related to the water element, because as we know, the moon is affecting the tides of the water, and it's having a big impact on the behavioral patterns of animals as well as the human beings. So there's this very harmful influence that is actually coming from the moon itself. So I'm gonna read kind of like a summary of what I just said, and more like from a technical perspective. So a significant event that distorted the natural relationship between the human race and the animal plant kingdom is the insertion of the moon. It was the agenda of the Wisa Luciferian races and the Dragoons to begin the process of the severe contamination of the planetary environment with the metatronic frequencies. So in here it was about purely the metatronic energies, not really about the plasma templates. To make the planet more vulnerable to manipulation and to connect it with the various black hole phantom systems, that was actually the main reason why the moon was inserted, to create like a set of wormholes on the planet. Another reason was to hijack the organic Gaian elemental coding. So there's been still certain races that were carrying that imprint through which they could easily evolve and unite with that imprint with Gaia before its fall. And the elementals were playing a big role in that, because we were carrying, in our plasma templates, would carry those primal elemental templates that were setting the blueprint for manifestation of the elementals on the light body and the physical body level. So they were going for kind of reversal of those elemental codes of the Gaia. The moon was a part of the planet referred to as Maldek, located between Mars and Jupiter. So now what we are seeing as the asteroid belt, these are basically the remains of the planet that once used to be there. But this planet literally imploded due to different sorts of conflicts that were taking place there. And a part of that Maldek, like an aspect of it, has been brought in and inserted as an artificial satellite, pretty much, around this planet. Before the actual insertion of the moon around the planet, this celestial body had been charged with the reversed violet ray energies. And once brought to the planetary grids directly, it started affecting the entire life field. Human beings immediately lost the full relationship with the plants and animals. Some of the animals and plants, started to attack them and act against them. For some of us, this may be the core trauma relating to a sense of betrayal. The plant, animal, as well as the human kingdom started following the false attunement that was being broadcasted through the planetary grids, through the moon itself. So what started to happen is, for example, it also distorted the menstrual cycles of women, where right now they are attuned to the moon cycles. That should never be the case. The water started to be manipulated through the tides. So, and it's kind of like even the brainwaves started to be affected by the reverse frequencies coming from the moon itself. So it's kind of like the insertion of that artificial celestial body had a significant impact on the entire life field and all of its patterns. The key element in that story is the reversal of the water element that has been partially harnessed through controlling the flows of the water, and the flows of the water like on the planetary level, but also the human level, like the blood. It kind of feels like for me when there is the full moon, it's as if like my blood pressure is just getting either very low or very high. So there's like a certain pattern behind it. The future timelines of the eternal Urea Earth are free from this artificial attunement. So that's actually something really amazing. The moon is not going to stay with us for too long. And now a little bit about the circadian rhythms, because we discover that there's a certain influence coming from the moon, and it's not necessarily a good type of influence, especially that there's also something that is referred to as the moon egregor. So the moon egregor is basically like a certain being created by the collective consciousness. And if you have ever practiced like the new moon or the full moon rituals, magic, whatever that was, it probably connected you to that egregor. And now that egregor is affecting you and draining energy from you every time there is a full moon or a specific kind of an event like the eclipse. The eclipse is also like not even a natural circumstance, because the moon is not supposed to be here on the first place. So like the energies of the eclipse definitely weren't a good thing. So now a little bit about the circadian rhythms. I want to speak about it before we get to the end, because I think this has quite also a big impact on the entire elemental kingdom. And if you've been experiencing any kind of changes in your daily habits, like sleeping patterns or like eating habits, this might be related to what is going on right now, that we are kind of stepping out of those artificially inserted circadian rhythms and we are shifting towards better cycles. So let's take a look. The circadian rhythms, which is a 24-hour cycle that regulates the sleep-wake cycle, are main rhythms or programs that control the life cycle, not only of the human race, but also the plants and animals. The core programming center of the circadian rhythms is the SCN, which is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. I would rather go by the SCN, located in the hypothalamus. This area of the brain adjusts the natural biorhythms of the body to the environment. At the same time, the SCN is directly controlled by the net field, an artificial frequency fence located in the Earth's atmosphere. So those cycles, the circadian rhythms, are artificial. The fact that it's like, let's say, you're supposed to like go to sleep at 10 o'clock in the night and then you wake up at 7 in the morning, it doesn't necessarily have to be this way. But it's kind of like a program, like you sleep during the night and you're awake during the day. Not necessarily, actually. An essential aspect of the present planetary changes includes changes in the circadian rhythms as the net field is being progressively released. So it's not something that's going to happen from one day to another, but this net field is in the process of being dismantled. So that means also changes in our circadian rhythms. The SCN is going to gradually shift to the biorhythms of the aspect of Earth that we resonate with, allowing for the attunement with various timelines that progressively become available to the planetary life field. Changes in sleeping patterns, eating habits, and various hormonal autoimmune responses may be a result of shifting from the biorhythms of the net field to more organic high-frequency spectra of waves. So as we are kind of going through that shift, and that's going to affect the human race and also the animal and the plant kingdom, like in the past, it would be kind of like healthy to go to sleep at a certain time to like get the most out of it, to kind of have your brain waves realigned and like to produce enough, like you've been kind of aligning that with like the production of the melatonin in the body and all this fantastic stuff. But right now it's all changing. So if you feel like going to sleep in the morning and you can allow yourself for that, go ahead, because you might see those different changes and you might feel more rested if you actually do that. So there are changes that are happening with those cycles that we have been attuned with for a very long time. So just kind of observe your body, observe its reactions, and you will know what's the best for you. So I would say that this has been everything for today. I was actually speaking longer than I expected. So I hope that everything, or at least most of the things that I talked about, make sense to you and gave you a little bit of more perspective on the elemental kingdom and how we are in this position where we are right now and how we are actually kind of like coming back to those primordial imprints and to that pure co-creation that we had with all of those beautiful elemental forms. So I hope you enjoyed this, and if you have any other questions, you can also feel free to message me. And well, if there's gonna be a lot of questions, I might elaborate on certain aspects in the future. And very soon I will also speak more about the Elasian first fall. I'm still kind of preparing the materials when it comes to that. So I wish you a wonderful start of your week, and I will see you soon. Take care and bye-bye.